Just going to start with a little bit of a introduction. So, firstly, thank you for inviting me to come along. I always like coming to schools and meeting people in person. These days, everything's online. Most of our UCAT preparation and things are online these days, so it's nice to see people in person. So my name's Ray. I'm a gastroenterologist. So I work with gut health, and I did that in Melbourne. And I went to a school called Melbourne High School back in the day. That's me back when I was sort of your age. Much less grey hair, much more fresh-faced. But you can see I went through and did well in the sort of process of getting into med school, and ended up at Monash University, which is the only undergraduate option in Victoria. In New South Wales, you have a number of undergraduate options to get through to med school. I ended up becoming a gastroenterologist, as I mentioned. I went and did a doctorate over in Edinburgh, and that was in my area of interest, which is inflammatory bowel disease. So I'm actually here this weekend for, as it turns out, I was texting Katrina. That sounds weird to do, but I was the other day, and it was about whether I was able to come up to Sydney, and I happened to be here this week, actually about a roundtable, a national roundtable on Crohn's and colitis and how we can better treat patients. So a lot of people from around Australia are in Sydney to discuss that. So I thought, what a good opportunity to come see you guys here. I've taught a number of people over the years in the UMAT, back when it was the test to get into medicine, now the UCAT and interviews and all the rest of the stuff in a very complicated space, which is getting into med school. So I understand there's a lot of people here from younger years as well as year 12 and 11, so that's where I'm going to pitch it. I'm just going to really quickly go through the complicated pathways of getting into med school. And this slide really is not for you to memorize all this stuff or try to get into the nitty-gritty. It's really just to give you a bit of an idea that although medicine seems like there's one pathway to get in, there's actually lots of different pathways. So a lot of people get quite stressed out thinking, I have to get in from high school, and that's not accurate at all. There's plenty of pathways, especially here in New South Wales, where you can get into med school from university. That's after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or after finishing a degree. And many people actually take a sort of longer path going into a different degree, finishing that degree, working in an area, and then getting to med school as well, if that's what you're interested in. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview, just so you hopefully relieves a bit of anxiety around the whole process. So once you finish year 12, the major criteria to get into med school are ATAR, your UCAT, and interviews for most universities. There's really just two different forms of school leaver entry. The first is a direct entry, which means that you get straight into medicine. So after year 12, you start med school the next year. And that's what I did at Monash University. You can do that here in New South Wales at UNSW, you can do it at Newcastle, and you can also do it at Western Sydney. You do it in many other universities around Australia too. Those universities. There's also this other pathway called guaranteed entry or provisional entry. It's a bit different. It means that it's like an IOU. So for the students who do extremely well at certain criteria, so for example the ATAR, if you get a very, very high ATAR, we're talking about high 99s, then for those students, there's a few select universities who will say, oh, well, we really want you to come to our uni, but we don't have an undergraduate course, so we'll get you to do an undergraduate course in something else. It could be anything, it could be mathematics or law, or it could be arts, and then we'll get you into medicine without having to do all the other stuff, like the GAMSAT, other sort of postgraduate entry pathways. UQ and UWA do use the UCAT, so it's sort of a bit, the ATAR criteria is sort of more like 98, 99, but the other universities it's very high. So USyd, for example, they only offer a handful of places, it's 99.95. So this is the kind of, it's sort of an alternate pathway, but most people would be going through the direct entry pathway. And then there's non-school leaver entry. So this is, I think, really important to know because a lot of people don't know this. and they think if they don't get into medicine after after year 12, they have to wait until they've finished a degree. In fact, you can get into medicine from your undergraduate degree. Now, you might not get into medicine and decide, look, I want to do something else like nursing or physio or pharmacy or biomedicine, but I don't necessarily want to complete that degree if I don't have to, because my aim is to get into medicine. So if that's you, then you can actually do a course, whatever it is. You can sit the UCAT again, which is the test that I'll talk about a bit more later, and at that point you can get into medicine with a good GPA and an interview. Now, this is a really good alternative strategy if you don't quite make it that first year. And the best news for you guys here in New South Wales is that the universities that offer it are mainly based here in New South Wales. So Newcastle, UNSW, and Western Sydney are the major universities. And then there's graduate entry, which means that you've completed your undergraduate degree in something else, and then you get into medicine, and there are some universities that offer those universities there. That's a lot to take in. So yeah, feel free to take a photo if you want to. Really, the idea here is that, again, I don't want to sort of confuse you too much, and if you've got questions at the end of it, if you're in year 12 and you've got questions about specific pathways here, you can come talk to me. But there are multiple pathways into medicine. This is a good opportunity to get in from year 12, but it's not the only one. This is my question for you, so hopefully you've not clocked off at Friday. You can answer some questions. So firstly, what do people do at university if they don't get into medicine? What do you think is the sort of thing that most people do, maybe for the year 12s and 11s amongst you? If you don't get into medicine, you really want to do it, what's the course that you think that people would do the most commonly? Biomedicine? Yep. Med science? Yep. Any other? Nursing? Okay, good. Any other options? Okay, this is a pretty important question, right? Because medicine's so competitive these days that actually this question will form a big part of how you select things in your preferences for UAC. So biomedicine and medical science is probably the two most common degrees that are put down. But I would say that they're also the two most common degrees that no one knows anything about. Like, what is actually in biomedicine? Does anyone know what you do in a biomedicine course? Is it like medicine but not quite, or is it, what do you do? I can tell you that, at least 50% of people who put biomedicine down as a preference don't have any idea about what it involves, which is unbelievable, given you're thinking about spending 3 years of your life to do this, and this is like, you've got to do well in it to get into medicine. And what's the reason for that? Fundamentally, Katrina will know that universities have this incentive to kind of get people through their doors. And this is a really easy way for them to do that. They want to get people through to do medicine, and so, do biomedicine. Sounds like medicine, and, sometimes there's incentives to get through via biomedicine. So I really have this thing about this, that you really need to be careful when you make a decision about this. You need to know exactly what biomedicine's about, because it's very, very easy to, 3 years later or 2 years later, be hating what you're doing, have no idea why you did it in the first place. And then, of course, the sunken cost fallacy means that because you've spent 2 years, you better finish it. And then because you finish it, you better work in the area. And then all of a sudden, because you didn't get in medicine in that way, you're doing something you didn't really love and didn't want to do. So it's really important when you're thinking about the courses that you put down after medicine or dentistry or whatever it is, you've got to look into it properly, not just default into it because the universities say it's easy to get in this way. Often it's not actually easy to get in this way, and if you're doing something you don't actually want to do, it's very hard to get the GPA to get into medicine anyway. So be very careful there. So what are the other options in healthcare? By the way, I'm not saying that don't do biomedicine, okay? So if you want to, if you look into it, if it's a course that suits you, and I can tell you what it is to a degree. It's lab work, it's basic science, it's stuff, looking in the microscope and looking at pharmacology and looking at microbiology. This is really important work, but it's not for everyone. It's not medicine, that's for sure. So what are some of the other options in healthcare? Well, we know that there's been an increased community interest in healthcare since the pandemic, and there's always an interest in healthcare, but particularly since the pandemic. And you'll have heard about the increased focus in aged care, on nursing that was mentioned earlier, and of course in Victoria we've got free nursing care. So for free nursing at universities. I don't know if they've got that. I don't think they've got that in New South Wales, but it may be something that they look to subsidise because there's this desperate need for ancillary healthcare services. NDIS has obviously got a lot of press recently, and really, although there may be some rotting around the edges, there's this huge need for these services for people in the healthcare industry, and so there's a lot of opportunities for people who want to become speech pathologists and occupational therapists and these sorts of careers, which in the past really didn't get paid very well at all, which now are starting, society's starting to see the importance and worth of these careers. So really what you've got to look at I might just move on to this one because it's a bit funny. Here we go. So with healthcare, really what you've got to look at is what you're good at and what you love. And so really you've got to look at what you want to learn about the career first. And so a lot of the ideas about learning about the career come from what we call in-person work experience. And a lot of you will be having some anxiety about getting some work experience in the medical field or some other field. And maybe you've tried, but you haven't been able to get work experience in these areas. I'll tell you, probably the top 3 questions I get asked is, do I need to get work experience to get into medicine or dentistry? And the answer is, frankly, no. It's not like the US or the UK. I mean, I mentor some people in the US and the UK. They have to get work experience, and not only work experience, but they have to get that experience documented, how many hours, where they're doing it. None of that exists here in Australia. Is it worthwhile? Absolutely. But so if you can get it, you should get it. And why is it worthwhile? So you can learn about the career, so you understand what it's like, and therefore it's a sustainable option for you, because it's not an easy career. So that's useful, but it's not critical. And I think that, again, is nice to know because it relieves some of that anxiety around getting the 1 week of doctor shadowing that you're supposed to get. In the end as well, I mean, a doctor's career is so long, you're seeing one window into 1 week into their job of one specialty or one area. Like, are you really gaining a whole lot from that? Actually, the whole purpose of work experience is to learn about the career as a whole, and you get a whole lot more by talking to doctors, by talking to medical students, by reading books and listening to podcasts about medicine. That's the kind of thing that really, I think, shines through in interviews more than just a week here and there, So that's useful, but it's not essential. And think about why you're doing the work experience in the first place. And there's actually really good virtual work experience options that have come out of the pandemic that I can point you to that really help gain that kind of understanding of the career without having to have that in-person work experience. So you've also got to realise that you've got to be the right fit for healthcare as well. I mean, I'm assuming that you're here because you see some of these qualities in yourself, and really, if you don't, then it's really hard to justify a career in healthcare because you kind of need those qualities. And so a sustainable career in healthcare relies on you having some of these qualities or seeing some growth in some of these qualities in you and then pursuing it, because otherwise you're fighting against what you might actually want to be doing. And really, it's not an easy career. You'll have heard a lot about burnout, especially through the pandemic in healthcare. But it's a very rewarding career for select people. A lot of people think about medicine as a great career, but it's a great career for
for certain people. It's actually a terrible career for some people. So you've got to work out whether it's a right career for you. And that's why we try to encourage, and I'm sure Katrina does too, to learn about the career more and more as much as you can. So there are lots of different healthcare jobs around. I mean, here's a few of them: doctor, obviously nursing, dentist, pharmacist, paramedic, and physiotherapist. And as I said to you, there's sort of nursing as one area. What do you think in terms of those, let's say a nurse, a doctor, a dentist, and maybe a pharmacist? Out of all those professions on the hospital ward, what's the profession that sees the patient the most, like the face-to-face time, do you think? A patient's admitted to hospital, who's seeing the patient the most? The nurse, 100% is the nurse. The doctor actually often will see the patient quite briefly in the morning. If you've ever been in hospital for your family member or yourself, you'll have noticed this. The doctor will come in, float by and say hello, and then head off again. I mean, that doesn't mean they don't care, it's just that they've got a different role in the healthcare setting, and the junior doctors will be often on the ward doing the work that you might not be seeing. So it's a different sort of it's a different type of career. A lot of people see doctors as the people who are always there with the patient, but actually there's a whole bunch of other careers out there which offer various types of in-person and interaction with the patient that's different to, say, being a doctor. A dentist has a different kind of relationship with their patients, don't they? And so you've got to think about what's the one that suits your personality and the one that you want to pursue. I mean, there's way more than that as well. If you look at some of these careers, if I wasn't a doctor, I think I'd definitely be a psychologist. I think that would be my career. I love psychology. I love the complex way that humans work and behave, and I think it's fascinating. And you can become a clinical psychologist. And one thing I want to impress upon you is that these are the kind of clinical careers that have far more overlap with medicine than something like biomedicine or medical science, where it's about the basics around how things work and lab work. That's really important and good, and I think it's a necessary career. This clinical application of work, that's far more overlap with medicine. So if you want to do medicine, my sort of argument is, unless you're really passionate about that biomedical side of things and really want to learn how things work in an analytical way, these are the kind of careers that I would encourage you to do if you're interested in that clinical aspect. And remember, not everyone will get into medicine from year 12, but if you go into some of these careers and then try some of these alternative pathways to get into medicine, it's a good option. There's obviously a lot of community and social inputs into this now as well. The NDIS, aged care reforms, and increased mental health burden, which is meaning that a lot of these careers are becoming much more in demand. So compared to even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, these kind of careers are in demand, which means that they're better conditions, it means that you can argue for better pay, and so some of these careers which may have not been as enticing in the past are becoming a lot more enticing now. Okay, so just a reminder that there's lots of pathways into medicine. If you don't get into medicine, think about what your backup career would be, and have a think about what kind of career overlaps with medicine if that's what you want to pursue. Not only because that'll be useful for your future medical career, but you've also got to think about, given how difficult it is to get into medicine, if that doesn't happen, what's the career that you're going to be interested in actually pursuing going forward? So if you don't get into medicine and you do pharmacy, you've got a vocation, you've got a career, you can pursue that, you can do that afterwards. Physiotherapy, similarly. Nursing, so these are the clinical careers that are very similar to medicine in many ways, not in all, obviously. And so I would say just to think about that when you're making that decision. All right, so we'll move on to UCAT. So who's in year 12 or 11 here? Okay, and so 9 and 10, the others, yeah? Okay, so UCAT may be on the sort of radar for you guys up there who are in year 9 and 10, but for you here in the front, I'm sure it's right front and center, and you're probably feeling in a very similar way to this, that you think, I've done all of this work and I'm working hard at school, I'm doing all the right things, and all of a sudden they've put this other thing in front of me, and it's so different to anything that I do at school, and it's so hard, and I've not really found things hard at school before. Because most people who pursue medicine are pretty, not necessarily have always found things easy at school, but have worked so hard to get to the stage where they've done very well at school. And if you've done that, then it can be quite disheartening to come to a test that suddenly even people who do really well at school find hard. So I want to ask this question to you. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when trying to get into medicine? So this could be UCAT related, interview related, just mindset related. But what do you think are some of those mistakes that people make? And then we can see how we can avoid them. So, hands up. Yes, thank you. Yeah, leaving the UCAT to the last minute. And I'll explain why that's so important, but maybe you could answer this question. Do you think the UCAT's more similar to learning biology at school, or is it more similar to learning the trombone? The trombone is the right answer. Yeah, absolutely. It's far more like learning a musical instrument than learning biology or chemistry or maths, where a lot of that's knowledge and application based. This is a skill-based test. And so no wonder you wouldn't cram for the trombone. So you don't cram for the UCAT. And so that distributed longer term practice is pretty important. Yeah. What else? Yes?
Prioritizing HSC over the UCAT. Like they're similar, they should be similar. But sometimes people think HSC way over.
Yeah, really good point. So just to repeat it for the people at the back, prioritising HSC over the UCAT, and as clarified, although both are very important, most people would place far more emphasis on the HSC. And I think that's understandable and probably still right in a way. I mean, HSC works for every other career, so it's not like you could be placing the same amount of work. Otherwise, you'd be having to go to school twice, one for the UCAT and one for the HSC. That makes sense. But it does make sense to spend a bit more effort, doesn't it? And if you think about how much it actually counts for most universities, it's 50% to get the interview. For some universities, it's 33% for that, the UCAT, the data, and interviews. It's a lot. Think about how much work you put into the HSC over the years. It's a lot. And for medicine, it means that this one test means a lot. Now, what that I think means to me, and certainly when I went through and all the sort of, I think, hard-won insights I've gained from people who've done well with the UCAT over the last decade or two, it's all about making that balance. But that sounds easy enough when said from someone like me. I just balance it all out. But it's about just having regular practice. That means including it in your schedule on a daily or semi-daily basis. So the classic mistake that I see people make is you go and do UCAT for a period of time. So you get a question bank, or you purchase a verbal workshop, whatever it is. And you're really ready to go for it. You realise how important it is. And then you do poorly in a test, in one of the mock exams or something, you get disheartened. And no one's there. Your teacher's not there sitting saying, why aren't you doing this homework? There's no assignments along the way. It's very easy to just say, I'll do it later. And then, of course, over time, that gets harder and harder to get back into it. So you just have to have that, I think, a little bit of discipline to put it as a regular part of your schedule, irrespective of how you're doing along the way. If you were doing well at biology at school, you wouldn't say, I'll just leave it for next week or the week after. You'd work on it, and that's what you want to do for the UCAT. And particularly, you want to work on the areas that you're weakest at, because that's the areas that you're going to get the most benefit. Any other comments, maybe UCAT or not UCAT related? Yeah.
People might drop all their extracurriculars to devote time towards academics, but then when it comes to the interview process, you might not be as interesting or stand out compared to other applicants.
Yeah, that's a great comment. So the comment was about dropping everything and just doing academic work in year 12 and 11. And I was always of the opinion that when I went through at least, it helped me focus on school because I was able to at least have a bit of unwind time. So I was able to have that time where I did something else. But even more to the point with that, I think, you've got this tendency to schedule in your work during school. You have to schedule in your downtime. I think that's one of the things I always advise younger students to do, my medical students as well, where burnout is very common. You need to schedule in that downtime. Some of that's extracurricular activities. And you mentioned interviews. The number one thing for the younger students that are back there that I would advise you to do now is get into debating and public speaking. If you don't like speaking, debating, public speaking, that's even more reason to do it. It's the best thing that you could do for interviews, for starters, but I think far more important. It'll be most useful in any career you do. It's not the smart people who do well in this world. It's the people who can interact with other people, who can communicate, who can just talk. They're the ones who do well. So you can get into that. I was a very shy student in Year 9. Extremely shy, hated communicating, talking, hated public speaking. And I kind of forced myself, with encouragement from teachers and parents, to get into Toastmasters, which is a public speaking group, debating at school, helped me know it. And I think that's something that I would always recommend as well. But just extracurricular activities. Very good. Any last comments there? The easy pitfalls? Yeah.
Not keeping your options open.
Not keeping your options open, yeah, being super focused on one particular career. And that's where that biomed trap, I think, is very easy. I think it's fine to have the goal of doing a career, like medicine or dentistry or whatever it is. And to be really, adamant that you want to do that. I think that's absolutely fine. I certainly do. But if that doesn't work out, you need to visualize what that's going to look like. And if it's going to look like doing a course that you don't even know what it's about because someone's told you that that's a good way to get into medicine, it's not a good option. But if it's doing something like physiotherapy, which is very similar to medicine in almost every way except for scope, that is what areas of the human body you're looking at, in particular physiology as opposed to just muscles and joints, that's a better option. So you've got to visualize that and see what would you be happy with long term and short term if you did get it. All right. So in terms of UCAT tips, I don't definitely not going to go through questions, that's for sure. What I'm going to go through is very kind of high-level discussion around what are the things that you can do to do well in the UCAT. And really, the 3 Ds that I bang on about UCAT practice is distributed practice, deliberate practice, and discussion. And if you can do this, you'll be ahead of 95% of people doing preparation for the UCAT in terms of your efficiency. And everyone here is time poor, which means you have to be efficient in your UCAT study. So I don't think that's a trombone, I think it's a trumpet, but in a similar way to what we discussed, distributed practice is about doing regular stuff over time. And these two pictorial representations of work are the same total amount of work. But the bottom representation is infinitely better in terms of skills improvement than the top. But the top is what most people do for the UCAT. It doesn't make sense. You would never do it for an instrument. And this is a skills-based test because knowledge is not required, application is not required. It's about relying on your habit, basically, getting into the flow of work and building up those skills prior to that so that when you get into the exam, it's just autopilot. And of course, the reason for that is that the growth in your neuronal connections occurs in the breaks. So that speed thinking is what if you know, to put two words to it, the UCAT's all about speed thinking in multiple domains, and the speed thinking is what happens, and really your brain, I'm always fascinated by the brains of younger people because they work way better than my brain. I don't know about your brain, Katrina, but they work way better than my brain because they learn. You guys have incredible capacity to change your brain, way more than me. And that's something you should take advantage of by skills improvement. So what's deliberate practice? That was distributed practice. What's deliberate practice? Well, I've adapted a meme here. You know, none of you are going to be like this. I can't do it. I won't do it. Because you know how important it is. But the majority of people would do this. I'm spending 60 minutes on UCAT preparation tonight. That sounds pretty good to me, doesn't it? Like, at least you're making the effort. But that's the bell curve bulge, right? What you want to be is at the right-hand side of that. You've got to be deliberate. What's the thing you're going to do? Why? How? Okay, not planning this 3 weeks in advance, but planning your study session. And I generally recommend the next week's study sessions that you're going to be doing for the UCAT. Plan precisely what you're going to do and why. That's effective UCAT study. And it's also not just about doing things right, that's deliberate. It's also about doing the right thing. And that's that idea of continuous improvement. And we talked a little bit about doing things in the right way in terms of UCAT and ATAR. But it's also within the UCAT, like what is it that you're not good at? It's really hard to do stuff that you're not good at. You know, you've all probably had the sense that you go home and do homework on the things that you're good at, right? Because it's easy, it makes you feel good. When you do stuff on the stuff that you're not good at, it makes you feel bad, and you don't want to do it. But that's the thing that actually makes the biggest difference. On the UCAT day, though, you want to focus on your strengths, and the way to do that is through triaging and not just going through each subtest in the order that they have it in the exam. And you'll learn, I'm sure you've heard this term, triaging or sweeping. You really need to think about how you could use that for each subtest. So do the questions that you think you're better at and good at first, and then in the next sweep, you can do it. And the software allows you to do that in a really quick way. And so if you're not familiar with that, then we can discuss it at the end, but hopefully most of you who are doing it this year understand what I'm talking about there. It's that commitment to continuous improvement, or CCI, that I look for in anyone that I'm teaching. And then the other thing about deliberate practice is, and I think this is a really useful thing for school as well, is to not just read your solution when you've done something wrong, but try the question again before you read the solution. Then, after you've done that, do the question again if you get it wrong again, and then finally read the solution. Reading the solution after you've got something wrong is very passive. You don't learn a lot. What you learn is when you retry it, perhaps you get it wrong again, perhaps you get it right, but you really realize at that point why you got it right. Maybe it was a bit of extra time, maybe it was that you got the formula wrong, maybe it was a silly mistake. Those are the things that actually make a difference to next time when you do it. And actually on the platform we have, at least, you can do that. So that retry feature allows you to retry the questions for mock exams that you got wrong. It sort of spins off an exam that's just for you. So just to summarize, most people do mock tests and then just go ahead and do another mock test and do another mock test. It's a sign of madness to keep repeating the same mistakes. It really is. What you want to do is at least review them, and I would say you spend at least as much time reviewing your mock tests as doing them. So if you're thinking that's a 2-hour process to do an exam, it's also a 2-hour process to review them. It's a lot of time. But it's way better to do that 3 or 4 times than just to do mocks 4 or 5 times or 6 or 7 times without reviewing it. Really, what you want to be aiming for is is doing the mock, retrying, as we said, the questions that you got wrong, reviewing, and then reflecting. And how is reflecting different to reviewing? Reflecting is looking at the whole subtest or the whole exam and making notes on how you can improve. So, use your UK training platform to do that. The final D is discussion. You're lucky you're in a school. There's lots of people who are looking to do medicine. I was in a school that had the same sort of thing, and take advantage of that. I teach people lots and lots of people who log into my webinars who are from rural areas and they've got no one, literally no one that wants to do medicine in their whole school or the surrounding schools. They don't know anyone who's ever been wanting to do medicine. And that's hard. It's isolating. You guys have that opportunity that you can just at least discuss some questions. There's lots of ways that you can make it a bit more interesting and much more beneficial for you. Finally, there's some resources that you can have a look at on the website. So just the medentry.edu.au website. I have some resources that I can leave here or give to you, and you can grab some of those. And really, it's just there's handbook, there's steps to become a doctor. So what are the prerequisites you need to get? Right from then all the way to how to do well in the UCAT. And they're all on the website, and I'd encourage you to go have a look at those. I won't do much about what we provide, except to say I do workshops. I run them still. I think it's one of the things that I still find really interesting in my life is doing these workshops, because I see people like you who are motivated, interested, and wanting to do medicine as a career. And I've had people who've come through, been doing this for 20 years, who are now my colleagues in gastroenterology. So it's kind of weird to see it come full circle like that. But that's why, because people in med school and people like yourselves are going to be obviously the doctors of the future, so it's really nice to see that. So thank you for listening, and I hope you found that useful. If you wanted to contact me, you can do it at the bottom there, and I'm open to answering any questions. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Where's the best place to get resources to do mock tests and stuff? Do you suggest buying the resources, or do you know any free ones that you can sell?
Yep. So the question was, where's the best place to get resources? You have to take this with a grain of salt, given that I own a medical preparation company. But yeah, there's lots of free resources. I could tell you the official UCAT site, which is just ucat.edu.au, has a lot of free resources. I would say that the problem with that one in particular, the actual quality of questions is excellent. In fact, it's from this official site, so it's got to be. The problem is that you don't know how other people are going in relation to you. I think that's a really important assessment in terms of where your weaknesses are. Because, if you get 10 out of 12 or 98 out of 100 of a test, that sounds great until you realize everyone else gets 99, and then, of course, that's not great. So it's all relative, right? And so some of those, that one in particular doesn't have that. So I do encourage you to go to there. MedEntry has a free exam that you can try, and it's called a diagnostic exam. You don't have to put any credit card down or anything. So just do that and see how you go. And start with that and see the free resources, and then if you think you need to do a bit more work. I think these days most people need to buy something, but you can decide whether you want just online platform access or if you want extra teaching or whatever else you want. I'll just give this to Trina. So there's just some pamphlets if you wanted to get them on the way out. And then there's also, I think, there's a handbook which you can download from which is that one here, to get more information as well. Any other questions? Yes?
When did you start the practices?
Mine was 20 years ago, so you don't want to be taking what I did 20 years ago into consideration. This grey hair is not dyed, it's real. I did a test called the UMAT, which was the precursor to the UCAT, but sort of in a similar way. I think I realised again sort of pretty early how important it was. I would have spent something like a year practicing. The question, a lot of people ask, how long should I practice? Can I do well if I practice for a few weeks or a few months? I've seen lots of people do well after a few weeks of practice, a few months of practice, right? The question is how long do you need to get to your maximum for that year? And I think in general it's better to do a bit of an extended period of practice to get to that point. But as I said, everyone needs a different amount, and there's no one right answer for that. Yes.
For postgraduate, would you be able to do a degree in arts or something different and then get into medicine through that? Or
Yep.
how would that work?
Yeah, so the question is, for postgraduate medicine, can you do a degree in something else, or does it have to be sort of medical or science related? And the answer is you're absolutely right, and this is very misunderstood. You can do a degree in anything for almost every postgraduate degree. There are a couple of exceptions. Monash is one. They ask you to do a certain number of degrees, one of a certain number of degrees. But almost every other university you can, and sometimes they need you to do a particular subject. So you could do an arts degree with an extra subject in, something else. Or you could do a summer school in that to get that credit. And the other part of that is that it doesn't help to do like a big science degree in medicine a lot. A lot of people are like, oh, we're so far behind. Don't worry about it. The whole purpose of the medical course is to teach you that stuff. Yeah. Yes?
Did you have to do speed reading for your comprehension?
Yep. Yeah, I did. So the question was, did you have to do speed reading for the test that I did, which is the precursor to the UCAT? Speed reading is one of the hardest. Speed reading and comprehension is one of the hardest things in the UCAT, and it's the hardest thing to change in a short period of time. That's for sure. For verbal reasoning, the best predictor of success is people who read a lot. And I can tell you that girls do better than guys in verbal reasoning. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we've got statistics on that from the UCAT official. But so what is that about? And how can you change it over time? There's a couple of things you can do. You can learn about some speed reading techniques and improve it. But fundamentally, it's actually about your technique. That is, for verbal reasoning, most people will try to read it to understand it. That makes sense because you're going to be asked questions about it. But that's not the right technique at all. I mean, if you do that, you're really going to struggle to get through it. You actually have to read it with UCAT reading style, which is a real quick skim to try to extract key words and bits of information, flagging where things are located, and saying to yourself, I am going to go back to the text. Because the person who can read a text and answer 4 complex questions on it without going back to the text, it's very rare. Actually, what you want to do is speed read, extract a few key nuggets, and that's the kind of key skill. And then when you read the passage, you know where those things are located. You go back to them, read around the text, and answer the question. That's kind of the key skill of verbal reasoning. Most people do it the wrong way around. Yeah. Yes, good question. So does it matter where you study your medical course? Well, you could always come to Monash, which is a great university that I work at, but the answer is no, actually. Taking off my Monash hat here, you can study at any university in Australia that does medicine, and I'm still on panels to select interns and residents and junior doctors. I've never looked at which university they've got the degree. If it's from Australia, it doesn't matter. Because they're registered, they're accredited, and there's way more important things. And that's really different to, say, in the US, where they will very specifically look at which university you went to. Here it makes no difference. And don't let universities say, oh, you have to come to my course because it's prestigious. I've had people who get into a university like Newcastle or Western Sydney or something, and then decline the offer because they're so fixated on going to something like UNSW. It blows my mind. Unbelievable. Because they've kind of think this prestigiousness of UNSW. No, don't ever get brainwashed like that. In Victoria, we would say that Monash now has overtaken, and this is even with me being from there, from Melbourne as being probably the most attractive university for medicine, and that's because we offer an undergraduate as well as a postgraduate, and because we're a pretty good university. But the prestigiousness rankings, they're all based on research. It makes no difference to the undergraduate teaching. Like if you're going to look at anything, look at the Good Teaching Guide, Good Universities Guide for Teaching, and see where they rank there. But they don't advertise that. Yeah, and interestingly, Bond does really well there, which is what most people would consider to be a university that wouldn't rank well in prestige because you have to pay to get in. But it does really well there. But in the end, if any metric is of use, that's the one that I'd look at. Yes. I mean, it depends. I think there's really good, it's good that we've got both. But if you're here sitting with me now, knowing that you want to do medicine, I think the direct entry path makes sense. You get straight into medicine. Next year, if you're in year 12, you're going to be seeing patients in the clinical setting, doing stuff, learning about pharmacology and physiology and pathophysiology and anatomy, all the cool stuff. Like, if that's what you want to do, why wait? But if you don't know what you want to do, it's a different kind of story. And I think there's a really good thing that they've got these other pathways after you've done an undergraduate, or even when you're working, because a lot of people don't know they want to do medicine until later. Yeah, so not every university has prerequisites, but different universities have different prerequisites. I would encourage you to go to the MedEntry site, which is the one, and both of them are on there, but on the one on the left here, if you click on Free Resources, Become a Doctor, this is the page, and choose the right subjects is the first thing, and it's got a table with all the universities and all of the prerequisites. And they don't tend to change over time, so you can be confident that if you're in year 9 or 10, you do the right subjects to expand your options. Yeah.
There's always ways around that as well, though. So if you aren't in the right maths class to start with, it doesn't matter. You can find a different course to start, and then you can go down to postgrad, or join the UCAT, do the UCAT again, and go undergrad. So there's ways that you can do maths at university if you don't do advanced maths. Because that's always people's concern is, I haven't done advanced maths, or I did biology, or I didn't do chemistry. It's those sorts of things. So don't think that if you make the wrong decision now, that's it. You can't do that. Any other questions?
All good? All right, well, I'm here. If anyone wants to ask individual questions later, I'm happy to stay around for a little bit longer. Thanks very much for your attention. Good luck.